the city of Aurelia never truly slept. Towering skyscrapers glistened under the sun, their glass walls catching light like blades, casting sharp reflections across the bustling streets below. Among them stood the crown jewel, the Aurelia Grand Hotel. Its golden entrance, guarded by marble lions, was a place where only the elite dared to step. Every evening, chauffeured cars lined the red carpet, delivering men in crisp tuxedos and women draped in shimmering gowns. To the rich, it was just another gathering, another evening of laughter, champagne, and shallow conversations about deals, art collections, and yachts. But to the ones outside looking in, it was another reminder of how far away the glittering world truly was. Amara Reyes, a 23-year-old literature student, stood across the street that evening, clutching a folder of resumes in her worn leather bag. She had spent the entire day hopping from cafe to cafe, bookstore to bookstore, desperately seeking part-time work to fund her tuition. Her shoes were scuffed, her hair tied back hastily, and her blouse bore faint wrinkles she hadn't noticed that morning. Aurelia was a city of contrasts, and she lived in the shadows of its brightness. Where others saw only glamour, Amara saw the cruelty. The doors closed to ordinary people like her. Inside the Aurelia Grand, one man commanded attention more than anyone else, Alexander Kane. At just 35, he was already a billionaire. His empire stretched across industries, technology, finance, real estate. People whispered his name with awe and envy. His tall frame, perfectly tailored suit, and commanding gaze made him impossible to ignore. To many, he was a king among men, untouchable and absolute. Tonight, he was the guest of honor at the annual Aurelia Charity Gala, a place where millionaires pretended to care, donated checks for tax breaks, and applauded themselves for being generous. Fate, however, had its own plans. Amara hadn't meant to walk into the Grand Hotel that night. She was tired, hungry, and utterly defeated after a day of rejection. Her stomach growled as she passed the glowing doors, and for a brief second, she wondered what it would be like to step inside, even just once. She told herself she would never be seen, that she didn't belong there. And yet, when a group of servers entered carrying trays, she found herself swept in with them, almost invisible in her simplicity. The ballroom dazzled her. Crystal chandeliers scattered diamonds of light across polished marble floors. A string quartet filled the air with music so delicate it felt unreal. Everywhere she turned, she saw people dressed in wealth, their laughter brittle, their smiles practiced. For a moment, she stood frozen at the edge, clutching her bag, hoping no one would notice. But someone did. Alexander Kane's gaze fell on her as he stood near the stage, surrounded by admirers. At first, he thought she was staff. Her modest clothes contrasted sharply with the gowns around her. Yet there was something different in her posture. She didn't bow her head or shrink into the background. Her dark eyes, though tired, burned with something he rarely saw among the rich, raw defiance. Their eyes met briefly, and Amara, realizing she had been caught, quickly turned away. But the damage was done. A ripple of whispers spread across the room. Who was this girl? Why was she here? One of the socialites, a woman dripping in jewels, approached her with a sneer. "Are you lost, darling? This isn't a place for students, I suppose?" The others chuckled cruelly. Amara's cheeks flushed, but instead of retreating, she raised her chin. "I'm not lost. Just observing." "Observing?" The woman laughed, turning to her friends. "How quaint. You hear that, Alex? She's observing." All eyes turned to Alexander Kane, who had now stepped closer, intrigued. "And what do you see?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. The room went silent. No one dared speak to him without trembling. But Amara didn't flinch. "I see people pretending to care about the world while sipping champagne that could feed a family for a month," she said, her voice steady. "I see men congratulating themselves for donations that won't even dent their fortunes. I see women wearing necklaces worth more than an entire hospital wing. And I see you, Mr. Kane, being praised for generosity, while your companies pay wages so low your workers can barely survive." Gasps echoed through the ballroom. The socialite covered her mouth in shock. No one, absolutely no one, had ever spoken to Alexander Kane like that. Certainly not in public, and certainly not in his own world. Kane's entourage stepped forward, ready to silence her, but he lifted his hand, stopping them. His expression was unreadable. The crowd waited, hungry for his reaction. Some expected fury, others anticipated humiliation for the girl. But instead, Kane studied her with an intensity that unsettled even her. "You think you know me?" he asked softly. Amara didn't back down. "I know your type." The room buzzed louder, cameras discreetly raised by guests eager to record the scandal. Amara's pulse raced, her hands trembling around her bag, but she didn't let it show. She hadn't planned this, hadn't come here to insult anyone. But years of bottled frustration at the divide between rich and poor had found its voice. And now here she was, standing before one of the most powerful men alive, challenging him openly. Kane tilted his head slightly, a faint smile touching his lips. It wasn't amusement, it was something else, something darker, like a man measuring a chess opponent. "Interesting," he murmured, and then turned away, leaving the entire room stunned. The whispers grew into chaos. Guests speculated wildly. Was she an activist? A disgruntled employee? How dare she insult Alexander Kane? Some expected her to be dragged out immediately. Others were secretly thrilled, savoring the rare moment of rebellion in their carefully curated world. Amara stood frozen, her heart hammering in her chest. She thought she had won a small victory, a defiance against arrogance. But what she didn't realize was that Alexander Kane was not a man easily humiliated. He was a man who turned insults into opportunities, a man whose next move would not only silence the room but change her life forever. That night, as the gala continued in uneasy silence, Kane's eyes followed Amara's every movement. To her it was over, a reckless act she would regret tomorrow. But to him it was the beginning of something far larger. Because while she had spoken with fire, she had also awakened something in him that no amount of wealth or power ever could. And in the moments that followed, the world would soon gasp at what Alexander Kane decided to do next. The whispers of the crowd hadn't even settled before the billionaire Alexander Whitmore straightened his posture, the room's golden light reflecting off the crisp lines of his tailored suit. He didn't flinch or scowl. Instead, there was a calm, unnerving precision in the way he observed her, as if measuring not just her audacity, but the very essence of her character. The young woman, Emma Blake, hadn't expected him to respond immediately. She had expected laughter, mockery, maybe even a public dismissal, but not the intense, piercing attention that now seemed to pin her in place. Every heartbeat seemed louder as she realized that the murmuring of the crowd, the champagne glasses clinking nervously, and the fluttering whispers of onlookers faded into the background of a strange, silent tension that settled around the two of them. Alexander took a measured step forward, his polished shoes making a soft, deliberate click on the marble floor, and Emma felt her defiance waver for the briefest of moments under the weight of his gaze. And yet she didn't flinch. She didn't back away. Her hands remained on her sides, her fingers brushing the fabric of her simple dress as if drawing strength from its modesty. He stopped just a few feet away, close enough that she could smell the subtle scent of his cologne, a blend of cedarwood and faint citrus, sophisticated yet understated. The guests who had been so eager to witness scandal now found themselves leaning forward, almost afraid to breathe, captivated by the invisible magnetic field that had sprung between the two. Then Alexander spoke, his voice low but resonant, cutting through the whispers like a knife yet carrying an almost hypnotic calm. "I admire your honesty," he said, and the words, though simple, carried the weight of an entire storm contained within their precision. Emma blinked, unsure whether to feel offended or empowered as the crowd collectively held its breath. The tension was palpable, the contrast of her modesty against his opulent presence creating a dichotomy that was almost poetic. Alexander's eyes didn't waver. They seemed to drill into her, as if seeing through every layer she had built around herself, every hesitation she had carefully masked, every fear she had learned to hide. And then, without warning, he raised a hand toward her. Not in anger, not in confrontation, but in a gesture of acknowledgement, a silent signal that shifted the entire room's energy. The murmurs, the whispers, the subtle judgments of the guests, all were silenced by the sheer gravity of that gesture. People began to realize that this wasn't a typical confrontation between privilege and defiance. It was the world quietly recognizing merit where it had least expected to find it. Alexander didn't shout, he didn't berate. He simply offered her a private card, elegantly embossed, and when she hesitated to take it, he smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly, and nodded. Emma took it, fingers trembling slightly, and the weight of that small interaction, the kind that could easily have been ignored or dismissed, settled on her shoulders with unexpected gravity. Over the next several minutes, the gala continued around them, but something fundamental had shifted. The once judgmental eyes of the wealthy guests now held curiosity and cautious respect. Every glance that had sought to mock now measured. Every whisper that had been cruel now curious. And Emma, who had only intended to speak her mind in the face of arrogance, now carried an unspoken power, a subtle confidence that radiated outward without any grandiose display. Alexander returned to his seat, watching her from across the room, every movement deliberate, every step calculated yet completely natural, as though the act of witnessing courage had become a part of his own ritual. Meanwhile, Emma's mind raced, not with fear or regret, but with an unexpected thrill, a realization that the world she had thought so rigidly hierarchical could be momentarily suspended, reshaped by simple honesty and courage. She watched him, understanding at that moment that the billionaire's recognition wasn't about wealth, status, or power. It was about seeing the value of character, the quiet strength in defiance, the integrity in standing tall even when the odds seemed stacked overwhelmingly against her. And as the evening drew on, Emma noticed subtle shifts. Guests now approached her with newfound politeness. Staff offered discreet smiles, and even those who had mocked her earlier seemed to reconsider their judgments. Alexander's card remained in her hand, an elegant token of acknowledgement, but its significance was far greater than a simple piece of stationery. It represented validation, the world's rare recognition of bravery, and the implicit understanding that courage, even in small doses, could ripple outward, changing perceptions in ways words could not fully capture. Hours passed, yet the memory of that glance, that acknowledgement, remained vivid, imprinted in her mind like an indelible mark of possibility. Emma realized that she had entered the evening expecting nothing, intending only to make her point, and yet she was leaving with the world slightly altered around her, not through confrontation, but through the subtle power of being seen, truly seen, by someone who understood what mattered beyond wealth, status, or appearance. By the end of the night, she had a sense of transformation, not just in the eyes of those around her, but within herself, a budding awareness that audacity and integrity could coexist with humility and grace. And as Alexander observed from afar, a faint, approving smile lingering on his face, Emma understood that the events of the evening were not merely a confrontation, but a turning point, a quiet revolution that began in honesty and would echo far beyond the marble walls of that glittering ballroom. She left with her heart steady, her mind alert, and her resolve strengthened, knowing that while the world might still judge, mock, or doubt, her actions that night had already spoken louder than the wealthiest voices present could ever hope to shout. And Alexander, watching her depart, knew that moments like this, fleeting, unrepeatable, and unassuming, were the true currency of influence and respect. Far beyond money, far beyond prestige, far beyond the expectations of a society obsessed with surface appearances. That night, Emma's courage became a quiet legend, the type that didn't need headlines to matter, and Alexander's acknowledgement had ensured that the world would never see her the same way again. The tension that hung in the grand hall seemed to thicken the air, but Emma, standing at the center with her heart pounding, felt a strange clarity wash over her. The very moment she had expected shame, ridicule, or even outright anger from Alexander Vale, the billionaire whose reputation for impatience and dominance preceded him, transformed into something entirely unexpected, acknowledgement and opportunity. He walked toward her with measured steps, each one deliberate, his tailored suit impeccable, his presence magnetic yet calm, drawing the eyes of everyone in the room without a single word. As he stopped before her, the quiet click of his polished shoes on the marble floor seemed to echo like a metronome, marking the rhythm of a pivotal moment in her life. Reaching into the inner pocket of his jacket, Alexander produced a slender envelope, pure white with a subtle embossed insignia, and handed it to her without a single flourish, letting the significance speak louder than any grand gesture could. Emma's hands trembled as she took it, her pulse racing with anticipation and disbelief. She slowly opened the envelope to find an elegantly printed invitation to his private mentorship program, designed for the select few he deemed brave, innovative, or exceptional in character, qualities he recognized immediately in her candid honesty. Around them, the room had fallen into a hush, the guests frozen in a mixture of awe, confusion, and envy, whispering among themselves about what they had just witnessed. a bold young woman who had dared to speak truth in the presence of wealth and power, and instead of punishment had earned the rarest of rewards, recognition from a man whose judgment and influence could alter the course of a life. Emma's mind raced as she read the carefully chosen words, realizing that her impulsive act, which had felt like rebellion moments ago, had transformed into the first step of a journey that would redefine her life entirely. Sunlight poured through the tall, arched windows of the hall, casting warm golden light across the polished floors, highlighting the intricate details of the chandeliers above and reflecting off the crystal glasses that trembled faintly from the earlier shock. Every sound seemed amplified, the soft rustle of silk, the barely audible gasp of a guest, the distant clink of a dropped fork, and yet Emma felt as though time itself had slowed, giving her space to absorb the magnitude of what had occurred. Alexander's expression was unreadable yet inviting, a delicate balance of authority and quiet approval that contrasted sharply with the caricatures of billionaires often portrayed in tabloids. There was no ego to feed here, no need to dominate, only a recognition of merit where it was due, and the subtle, profound message that courage, integrity, and honesty were more powerful than fear or subservience. She looked around, seeing the faces of those who had mocked her moments before now turned to awe and curiosity, yet she felt no bitterness toward them. Instead, she recognized a lesson unfolding before her eyes, that the world often judges hastily, but true influence rests in the hands of those who can see beyond appearances and reward the substance of character. As Emma's gaze met Alexander's again, she felt a surge of resolve, a commitment forming deep within her that she would not squander this rare opportunity. She would rise to the challenge, carry herself with dignity, and honor the trust he had placed in her, not for applause or recognition, but because she knew this was a moment to redefine not only her path, but the potential she held within. The whispers of the room began to grow louder, a mix of admiration and incredulity, yet she remained composed, aware that this moment was private in its importance, even if public in its spectacle. She could feel the weight of her own choices, the consequences of her boldness, and the unspoken acknowledgement that sometimes a single act of honesty could change the course of a life, a career, and a perception of the world. Alexander stepped back slightly, allowing her space, and the subtle shift in posture, the faint but deliberate nod he gave, felt like a confirmation. He had seen her truth, her courage, and he believed in it. As the day progressed, sunlight streaming through the ornate windows shifted in angle, illuminating the room in patterns of gold and warmth, and Emma realized that life, much like the light, could be unpredictable, yet filled with brilliance when moments of courage aligned with opportunity. She held the envelope tightly against her chest, feeling the weight of potential and responsibility, and in that instant, understood the profound lesson Alexander had imparted without a single lecture. That respect and recognition are earned not by flattery or fear, but by authenticity, bravery, and the willingness to stand firm even when the world expects silence. Months later, she would reflect on this day as the turning point, the instant when speaking her mind, when asserting her dignity despite societal hierarchies, led to doors opening she had never dared to imagine. The mentorship program would challenge her, push her limits, and surround her with brilliant minds. Yet the foundation of that journey was built on this single act, this courageous choice to confront power with honesty. Emma's life was no longer a sequence of cautious steps in the shadow of expectation. It had become a path of intention, boldness, and growing influence. And in the quiet moments when she reflected on Alexander's calm authority, she recognized a rare truth. True power does not always roar, it often notices, rewards, and nurtures, quietly changing the lives of those who dare to be themselves. By the end of that day, the grand hall had emptied, the whispers faded, and Emma walked away carrying more than just an envelope. She carried the knowledge that integrity and courage could shift destiny, and that sometimes, the most unassuming acts in the face of power could resonate far beyond a single room, leaving a mark on a life and inspiring countless others who might one day find themselves in similar moments of choice and consequence, reminding them that to speak boldly, to stand tall, and to remain true to oneself is the beginning of greatness.